Welcome back to another episode of ARCA's Elevated Views. Today, I'm going to sit down with Ryan Cornforth, one of the owners of Rocky Mountain Solar and a partner in Lynnwood Roofing, to talk everything photovoltaics. We'll talk residential, commercial, what he's experienced in the brief time that solar has been in the Alberta environment, and where it's going. So, welcoming Ryan Cornforth here. Ryan, we're going to sit down today, talk a little bit about photovoltaics and solar installations. So maybe can you give me a brief introduction to yourself and how you got involved in the whole solar industry?
Thanks for having me on, first of all, and I appreciate being here and getting the chance to talk about it a little bit. Backstory on that is not terribly awesome or cool or exciting. It's pretty much just been kind of something that I've been interested in for quite some time now, and really wanted to get solar on my home for quite some time. Kept running the math, couldn't make it work. And eventually it kind of turned. We learned about Solar Club, something we can maybe talk about a little bit later. Finally reran the numbers on the Solar Club aspect of things and made the economics work. And I sat down with my business partners at the time. We kind of packaged up all three of our houses in the building and went for it and dove in. And once we did that, we kind of really recognized, I think, the opportunity that was there. We recognized the opportunity, obviously, from the roofing standpoint of having owned a roofing company for quite a few years at that point, and just the entire envelope. Sort of tied that all together. Had talked for quite a while with business partners Justin and Adam in the roofing company about sort of looking at other opportunities, looking at other things, ways to bring potentially other people into the mix, friends of ours that we wanted to get into business with. And this was a great opportunity. So we started sitting down probably mid-2020 kind of thing with a few of our friends and acquaintances from along the way. Started talking about the prospect of getting into the solar industry. Had a few interested folks and dove in from there and started the company in 2021, running along with the solar thing ever since, just slowly trying to organically grow out a business from there.
So it's a nice dovetail that you guys did with the roofing company and the solar industry, because as you know, a lot of times those two industries almost worked at odds. They weren't totally aware of what the other one was doing. So it was nice to see. And then we saw the advent of Rocky Mountain Solar,
yes,
your company, come along. And it's kind of nice because it incorporates kind of the best of both worlds, right? So you know what's going on both sides of the coin and what you can install. That's probably been a big benefit when you're talking about it to, say, residential homeowners.
We were the roofing company on a new construction project that kind of got smacked in the face with about 3/4 of the way through our project. Revealed to us that there was a solar array going up there, and we were sort of meant to be a part of prepping the roof and getting everything ready for that. And we were kind of caught in a weird position of like, okay, well, we'd love to help, but we don't have a clue what we're doing, what we're talking about here, what needs to get done. And again, it seemed like everybody was just kind of chasing one another around and trying to push responsibility onto one another. And it didn't really seem like there was much collaboration going on. And that's one thing that we've really always tried to be about at Lynnwood and now at Rocky Mountain as well, is trying to collaborate with people, trying to make sure that projects make sense and that what people are doing is the logical best solution. And that did not seem to be happening at all. It seemed like both from the roofing standpoint and the solar standpoint, like each one was kind of looking at the other as an afterthought, just wanted to get their own kind of needs met. That was a big turning point for us as well, being a part of that project, seeing what went into it. And I mean, we were fortunate enough to work with one of the better companies in the industry from a solar standpoint at that point. If it had been in some of the other companies that are around, I think it would have even gone more sideways. It was a good opportunity to learn, see what happens when it is a bit of an afterthought, see what happens when we're not brought in early enough as a roofing company, and when the solar company has to sort of scramble to deal with us as well. So that was a really good opening kind of project for us to get our feet wet on, build a lot of those lessons learned into our new company.
So you mentioned at the beginning that you and your business partners, you wanted to get into solar. When you're out there talking to people, really, what's all the fuss about? What is the main driver for people to want solar or renewable energy on the roof? Is it altruistic that they want to do it to do the better thing, or are they doing it for cost savings? A little bit of both. What are you finding when you're talking?
It's a loaded question, and I mean, It's got some political ties and some underpinnings of absolutely like the green side of things. I think at the end of the day, everyone has their own motivations for it. It's not like another piece of the building envelope where you need siding because you need siding because you need siding. It's a decision that you are consciously making of whether or not you want to put it up there. So I think people come at it from all sorts of different angles and all different approaches. And from the time that we have been involved in the industry, a lot of it has been economically viable. Just about every single system that we design, I'd say probably north of 85% are what I would call economically viable, which would be less than, if not well under, a 10-year payback period. For the longest time, that wasn't the case. Panel prices were much higher, inverter prices were much higher, install costs were much higher. You weren't doing it necessarily for the economics of it. You were doing it for kind of the green and the altruistic points of view. So that's really changed and pivoted. I think you can come at it from either standpoint now, and ideally a little bit of both. We really try to kind of impart on people that you don't necessarily have to be doing this from a green standpoint, and that there's a lot of people that shouldn't be trying to claim a green victory out of it. In a lot of cases, it should be about the economics, and just leave the green stuff aside, because depending on what types of materials and the different things that you're doing, it might not be the greenest solution possible. We're doing projects in BC where they already have a very net zero grid out there. It's hydro based, and putting solar panels on economically might make tons of sense. Is it making things actually more environmentally friendly? In some cases, absolutely. In some cases, maybe not so much, right? So you've got to kind of weigh that out project by project. And I think, again, people have to understand that and know that these decisions are going to have tons of variables. But I think what's bringing people to it essentially is right now is that they want to know, is there an economic benefit, and how green are these things really? So those are the questions we get asked the most by far.
So maybe I'll put you on the spot for a second. You said you guys have installed it on your homes. Have you noticed a difference?
Absolutely, yeah. My home as the test case, I'm extremely comfortable cracking open a before and after bill for people. Economically, it has made tangible difference. Alberta is such a unique market for utilities in general. We have a deregulated utilities market in Alberta, makes the economics just completely unique to anywhere else in Canada. There are some parts of Ontario, from what we understand, that are similar. Other than that, it seems like Texas is basically the only other place in North America that kind of rivals what we have here. So it allows for a competitive nature to utility pricing, which allows you as a power producer, once you have solar panels on your home or your business, to actually sell that back at a margin. A legitimate margin. From an economic standpoint, there's no doubt about it. It's not hard to see, again, every one of the apps for each one of the inverter manufacturers, they have cute little graphics that tell you, here's how many tons of CO2 you've offset, here's how many trees you've planted, equivalent of this, equivalent of that. And that's great. And I think, that's a huge part of what goes into it. It's just really obvious when you see 5 years ago living in the exact same house through the same month with kind of all the exact same appliances running. I used this many kilowatt hours, and now I'm using 20% of that, 15% of that. I'm selling more back to the grid than I was previously. So those types of things to me are much more tangible, where you can understand that there's a green aspect to that. There's no doubt about it that producing on site is just going to be more beneficial to the planet in the long run than burning it and transmitting it and all those line losses and everything like that. So
have you seen a pretty upwards trajectory of, talking from the residential side, people becoming more interested in adopting it and wanting to explore those options, especially now since we are seeing increased utility costs, like you say, in the deregulated market, seems to be increasing and inching up if you're not in a fixed contract.
Yeah.
You see a lot of people, I don't think in the past have looked at those numbers, but now they're really starting to pay attention, and then they reach out.
We feel that homeowners are it's been an afterthought, I think, for so many years. And then this kind of debacle that happened with the RRO rates, where people thought they were being capped, and it turns out it was only a deferral. So some people got kind of hit with some, I don't want to say penalties, but fees or charges that they didn't think were coming. That's really educated or forced a lot of people to become educated on what's actually happening with these RRO rates. I think at the same time, you see a lot of people just becoming a little bit more tapped into it because of the government spending on it. Good, bad, or indifferent, it's forcing people to look into it, whether you agree with it or not. There's $40,000 loans available, interest-free for 10 years. And I think you'd be crazy not to at least sniff around and go like, okay, well, what's this all about? What are my options here and how does this work? And factors that are pointing people to at least poke around, have a look, get a quote or two, sort out whether or not this kind of makes any sense. And then that gets the ball rolling with a lot of people. So one of the biggest differences between the roofing business and the solar business, on the front end of things, there is such an education component to the solar business where we spend, sometimes it's upwards of 6 or 7 hours with a customer or even a potential customer, just trying to explain the basics of how electricity, the grid, solar panels themselves, the inverters, all of that actually function. And then we can sort of get into the conversation of how do the economics work and how does this, why is there a business case for this? Why is there a value proposition here? So all of those sorts of things are so much different coming from the roofing industry where it's like, oh, your roof is shot, you need a new roof. Like, business case solved. That's kind of cut and dry, right? A little bit of a learning curve even for us as a business in that standpoint of helping people to navigate those types of things. It's not just cut and dry. Yeah, your roof is done and you need a new one type of situation. So that's been fun. I enjoyed that.
And I understand there's probably been a lot of advancements in the solar industry as, you know, the inverters are getting more efficient and the panels are getting more efficient and things are changing and codes are changing. That's probably been quite a challenge to keep up with that as well too.
Yeah, it moves fast. Again, especially coming from the roofing world where things do not tend to move all that fast. It definitely is pretty fast paced. We're fortunate, I would say, in Canada, we're able to look in on places like California, some of those US states that are 5 or 10 years ahead of us. It's quite a bit different. We can go down to trade shows and conferences in the US and really actually get an understanding of what's coming our way or what's headed our way in the next couple of years. So those things become very, very valuable to keep up on and understand what's coming down the pipeline. I think one of the biggest advancements that we have seen recently now is the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States, has onboarded a ton of more local manufacturing that is price competitive. So we're seeing options for the first time since we've started and for the first time from what we've been told by people that have been in the industry for a lot longer than us, kind of the first time ever you can put together an entire system that's North American made. North American made panel, North American made inverter, North American made racking, right down to nuts and bolts. And you can assure a customer that nothing has any pinch points with foreign labor problems or any of those types of issues that have always been kind of clouding the industry, let's call it. So that's been really, really nice to see. That's been in effect now, I think, 3 years in the US. So we're really, really starting to see the fruits of that now where panels are becoming readily available, inverters are becoming readily available. All these items are shipping out of the US, getting to our warehouse with gigantic made in USA stickers right on them, which is nice to see. Again, not a problem we've ever had to deal with on the roofing side, but it's, yeah, it really was something that bugged us in a way, was that we couldn't really ever get systems fully across the finish line until recently.
Well, and I think in the past too, a lot of people just have that common understanding that, I guess it would be a common misunderstanding now, 9 out of every 10 panels comes across the ocean.
Yeah.
So it's really not manufactured here and they come with those inherent problems that we see. But like you say, with an increased production and manufacturing capacity south of the border, that really improves the whole industry and allows everybody to look at it quite a bit differently.
The percentages are still skewed. Things are shifting slowly as they always do. But for the first time, you've got a situation where there's a price competitive option with a North American made label, and that's awesome to see. To your point earlier about just the keeping up with it, it's just understanding what's coming down the line, knowing how we can solve those types of problems. It does put pressure on all of the other suppliers at that point to sort of step their game up a little bit, which is great. I think, you know, the whole idea of the rising tide lifting all boats is kind of very applicable in this scenario where the U.S. has done a good job of putting the pressure on kind of all those foreign entities to raise their game up a little bit, because they have to keep pace and they have to be able to find ways to at least prove that these things are ethically sourced or they're not coming from these regions that we all kind of know of, but everybody for a while has either had to turn a blind eye on or be willing to pay a premium to ensure that things were not coming from those regions. That stings. As much as people want to support those types of things, there's only so much of an economic hit that you're willing to take before it doesn't really make sense anymore either. So there's a major balance there all of a sudden for the first time, like I said, since we've kind of entered the industry, which is great to see. It's a huge step in the right direction.
A couple questions I have for you on the residential side before we talk a little bit about the commercial side. How are batteries coming along on the residential side? So we all know that you can produce the power and you either use it or you sell it back to the grid. The next logical step would be to retain some of that power so you can use it during your peak period.
Yep.
Is that something that you see in, say, the next 5 to 10 years, an increased awareness capacity and people starting to get that included in their systems as well?
Absolutely, yeah. Hit it on the head in terms of that kind of timeline, that 5 to 10 years. Again, looking down to some of the states that leading indicators for where we're headed. They have a term for it called the duck curve, which is a really kind of unique power usage curve that a lot of the providers and operators in Southern California are running into. And it basically represents very high peak demand, kind of right around that 4, 5, 6 o'clock window. If you map it out, it does kind of resemble a duck. That's why they've termed it that. But the whole market in that Southern California region, they're moving towards kind of two things, batteries being one of them. So absolutely, I think that's going to become sort of a necessary part of these systems to stabilize that load. And then vehicle to grid charging or vehicle to home charging capabilities. So this is where you can take an EV, plug in, charge up during a day around noon hour when the sun is out and you've got kind of an abundance of electricity. You charge your vehicle up, you drive that vehicle home, and then instead of at 4 or 5 o'clock, instead of you looking to draw power in off of the grid, you're actually capable of sending maybe 20% of the power from your vehicle back into the grid to help stabilize that out. In theory, you're sending it over to your neighbor's house or whatever to kind of help them out.
Yeah, so it's kind of like that Ford commercial where they plug the lightning into the house and the house lights up.
That's exactly right. And that's really been kind of a theme of the last couple of trade shows that we've seen is prepping homes, prepping these facilities and everything for all of that capability to make sure that you have a charging system that's compatible with that, to make sure you have a vehicle that's compatible with that, to make sure that your existing infrastructure in your home or your business are prepared for these types of things. So there's kind of two ways to go about that. And there's probably, I imagine there will be some additional things that come online, but to level out that real peak demand at 5 or 6 o'clock, some sort of storage is going to be absolutely necessary. There's no doubt about that. Battery systems, similar to where the panels were maybe 10, 15 years ago, we're seeing kind of these battery systems start to take on a bit of a life of their own. There's even a new term now in the most recent code, and there was a stand data that came out recently that kind of refers to these as energy storage systems. So something like a Tesla Powerwall or similar types of things where they're not really referring to them even as batteries anymore because battery kind of implies a good old flooded lead acid. There's all sorts of rules around where you can put these things and how they need to be stored and they don't really actually apply to the same thing as like a Tesla Powerwall or a similar energy storage system type of makeup. So you see new rules coming out and all sorts of new best practices that are starting to be adopted to accommodate this. And that, to me, that's a really good indicator that people understand that, okay, we're going to have to live with these things. We can't just dump them outside at the back of the house or something like that. Like they're probably going to need to go in a mechanical room. They need safety features. We need code rules for all of these types of things, and those things are starting to be written. So I think we're seeing a move, but 5 or 10 years, I think, like you mentioned right off the bat, is probably a realistic timeline for something like that to happen.
So one of the things you alluded to in a question I was wondering, was solar ready. On the most simplest terms, my travel trailer. It's solar ready, so it's got the plug in there. I can just plug in the solar when I want to trickle charge the battery. But when you're talking buildings, say when you're talking homes, I understand it a little better now when you're talking about some of the equipment working together, but What does really that solar-ready concept look like for a house?
There's lots of components that you could dive into and get kind of into the nuts and bolts. I look at it always, obviously coming from the roofing background, one of the things first and foremost that needs to be solar ready is the roof. And lots of roofs are not solar ready. If it's a 15-year-old builder grade shingle, or if it's 15 or 20-year-old loose lay ballasted 45 milli PDM, that's probably not a solar ready roof. You should be looking at some kind of an upgrade. You should be looking at some kind of a more compatible roof system to get yourself to a point where putting solar panels on makes sense. Because the worst thing is put those solar panels up and then be dealing with a roof replacement 2 to 5 years later that may or may not have been because of the solar panels. But even if it wasn't, then all of a sudden you're dealing with extra overburden. And why are you ripping all this brand new stuff off that you just installed a few years ago to put a brand new roof on when you probably should have flipped those operations around and gotten yourself ready? So the same kind of goes for, we see a lot of existing electrical infrastructure. Building was built in the 60s or 70s. Older homes will have only a 60 amp service into the house. Even a 100 amp service now it can be kind of small for some of the arrays that people need and some of the power that people are looking to put on, especially if you want to get into kind of the heat pump realm or major loads like that. So electrical infrastructure is a big one, making sure that is quote unquote solar ready as well. I think we see a lot of people that want to dive in and maybe don't understand what all the components are that they have to just be mindful of. And again, I would say relatively speaking, rare. Like we're only running into maybe 20% of buildings that absolutely have to do upgrades on. It's more dealing with the kind of the messy middle where you maybe don't have to, but you should. Maybe you've got a 10 or 15-year-old roof that has a 25-year-old lifespan or life expectancy. Should you re-roof that? Probably. Would I can't say for certain that I would. What solar ready means, looking at it from a kind of a 30,000 foot view, is just understanding what you have going into the project. If you're aware that you have a 15-year-old roof that's got a 25-year life expectancy, then hopefully in 10 years, if you have to replace your roof, you're not completely blindsided by that, going like, oh my gosh, what happened here, right? It's just setting the proper expectations. I've got my perfect roof system that I'd love to see every single solar array go onto. I've got my perfect electrical infrastructure that I'd love to see every roof go on, but we've operated out of enough buildings to know that those things can be difficult to achieve, so yeah.
Well, Ryan, let's just pause right here and we'll take a small break. Thank you for listening to another episode of ARCA's Elevated Views. We hope you have enjoyed the program. For additional information on ARCA, our contractors, or our program, please go to arcaonline.ca. Or you could follow us on Instagram at Roofing Careers or on LinkedIn at ARCA-Alberta Roofing Contractors Association.